Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
The barbecue smoke drifted across my aunt's backyard as I flipped burgers for my extended family. After 8 months out of county lockup, I was finally feeling like I belonged somewhere again. My parole officer had been encouraging me about my progress, and even my skeptical relatives seemed to be warming up to having me around. Then my Uncle Frank cornered me by the grill, his breath reeking of beer and rage, his meaty fingers wrapped around my throat as he snarled those words that would change everything between us forever. The pressure on my windpipe made stars dance behind my eyelids, but what hurt worse was the familiar weight of shame crushing my chest. Frank's grip tightened as I remembered that night, 18 months ago, when everything fell apart. I had been stocking shelves at Peterson's Hardware for 3 years, barely making ends meet but keeping my head down. Then corporate decided to cut costs and laid off half the staff. 3 weeks of unemployment benefits and a stack of rejection letters later, I found myself standing in a convenience store at 2 in the morning with a shaking hand wrapped around a pistol I had never fired. The clerk, a college kid named Danny, had looked at me with more pity than fear. His hands trembled as he opened the register, and I saw my own desperation reflected in his eyes. The $93 I walked away with didn't even cover my car payment, but it bought me a one-way ticket to the worst decision of my life. The police caught me 3 blocks away, still clutching the crumpled bills. My family's faces during the trial haunted me more than the judge's gavel. Mom crying in the front row, Dad's shoulders sagging with disappointment, and Frank, shaking his head like he had always known I would end up this way. County lockup taught me things I never wanted to learn. How to sleep with one eye open. How to make toilet wine from fruit cocktail. How to swallow your pride when bigger men decided they owned your commissary money. But it also taught me something unexpected. I was stronger than I thought. The anger management classes felt like a joke at first, but slowly they started making sense. The counselor, a former addict named Marcus, helped me understand that hitting rock bottom could be a foundation instead of a grave. I earned my GED behind bars and started writing letters to the victims of crimes, learning to see past my own pain. When I walked out 8 months ago, Aunt Martha was the only family member waiting at the gate. Uncle Frank sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, making it clear this arrangement was temporary charity. They had converted their basement into a small apartment, and I paid $400 monthly rent from my job at Sullivan's Auto Repair. The work felt good. Getting my hands dirty fixing engines reminded me I could build things instead of breaking them. My supervisor, Carlos, was a straight shooter who cared more about showing up on time than my criminal record. Slowly, I started believing I might actually make it on the outside. But Frank never let me forget where I came from. Every morning over coffee, he would mention newspaper stories about repeat offenders. Every evening, he would comment on how expensive groceries had become since I moved in. The passive-aggressive digs felt like paper cuts, small but constant. Today's barbecue was supposed to be different. I had saved enough money to buy steaks for everyone, hoping to contribute something meaningful to the family gathering. My cousins seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my job, and even my grandmother had hugged me without that stiff, uncomfortable pause she used to have. Then Frank started drinking heavier than usual. I watched him drain beer after beer while manning the grill, his comments growing sharper with each empty bottle. First, he complained about the cost of propane. Then he mentioned how crowded the house felt lately. By the time the sun started setting, his resentment was boiling over like an unwatched pot. The moment that pushed him over the edge came when my cousin Jake asked about my plans for the future. I had started talking about maybe taking night classes at the community college, using my GED to study automotive technology. The family seemed genuinely encouraging, asking questions about the program and offering to help with applications. Frank's face darkened with each supportive comment. When my Aunt Martha suggested I could use the dining room table for homework, something inside him snapped. He cornered me by the grill, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only I could hear. "You think you're fooling them with this good boy act? They're just being polite because they feel sorry for you. But I know what you really are." His words hit harder than any physical blow could have. This was the moment I realized that no amount of progress, no amount of honest work or changed behavior would ever be enough for him. In Frank's mind, I would always be the screw-up who embarrassed the family name. Then his hands moved to my throat, and the whisper became a growl that everyone could hear. "You're nothing but a parasite on this family." The 20 or so relatives gathered in the backyard fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Plastic forks stopped halfway to mouths. Children looked up from their games, sensing the adult tension even if they couldn't understand it. But nobody moved to help me. My cousin Jake, who had just been encouraging my college plans, suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Aunt Martha busied herself clearing already empty plates. Even my grandmother, who had raised 8 children and never backed down from a fight, turned away toward the house. I understood their paralysis. Frank owned this house, hosted these gatherings, and controlled the family dynamic. Standing up to him meant risking their own place in this fragile social ecosystem, but understanding their cowardice didn't make it hurt any less. As Frank's grip tightened, cutting off more of my air supply, I realized this wasn't really about my criminal record or my presence in their house. Something else was driving his rage, something deeper and more desperate than simple family disappointment. His eyes held a kind of panic I recognized from my own dark moments. The look of a man who had run out of options and was looking for someone else to blame. Whatever was really eating at Frank, he needed me to be the villain in his story. And from the terror creeping into his expression, I was starting to suspect that his real problems were much worse than an ex-convict nephew sleeping in his basement. Frank's breath felt hot against my ear as his grip tightened, cutting off more oxygen with each passing second. But it was his whispered words that sent ice through my veins, not the lack of air. "You want to know why you're really here, Courtney? Because I need that room. Need it bad. And your sob story about starting over is about to end." The family gathering continued around us in surreal, slow motion. Children chased each other between picnic tables, while their parents pretended not to see their host strangling his nephew. The cognitive dissonance made my head spin worse than the oxygen deprivation. Frank loosened his grip just enough for me to gasp a shallow breath, then pulled me closer to the smoking grill where the noise would mask our conversation. His voice dropped to an urgent whisper, words tumbling out like a confession he had been holding back for months. "I owe money, kid. More money than you've ever seen. $35,000 to some very serious people who don't accept payment plans or sob stories about family obligations." My mind raced to process this information while my lungs burned for air. Frank's gambling had been an open secret in our family for years. We all knew he spent Tuesday nights at the American Legion playing poker and went to the casino on weekends. But $35,000 meant this wasn't nickel-and-dime church basement gambling. "There's this game," Frank continued, his eyes darting toward the house to make sure Martha wasn't listening. "High-stakes Texas Hold'em in the back room of Kowalski's bar. Real players, real money." I started small, just trying to win enough to fix the roof leak Martha's been nagging me about. I tried to speak, but his thumb pressed against my vocal cords, a reminder that he controlled this conversation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The ex-convict being threatened by his law-abiding uncle who had gotten mixed up with criminals far more dangerous than I had ever been. The first few months, I was up $6,000. Felt like I had the magic touch, like every card was falling my way. So I started playing bigger pots, taking calculated risks that seemed like sure things. Then my luck turned, and I kept doubling down, convinced the next hand would fix everything. His voice carried the hollow desperation I remembered from my own addiction, not to drugs or alcohol, but to the adrenaline rush of easy money that had led me to that convenience store. Gambling addicts and desperate thieves spoke the same language of rationalization and inevitable consequences. "These aren't the kind of guys you stiff on a debt, Courtney. They're connected to the Torino family out of Chicago. Ever heard that name?" I had, unfortunately. During my time in county lockup, guys would whisper stories about the Torino organization with a mixture of respect and terror. They weren't the largest crime family in the Midwest, but they had a reputation for collecting debts with surgical precision. Missing fingers, broken kneecaps, houses mysteriously catching fire. They treated violence as a business expense, and fear as their primary currency. So here's the thing, Frank continued, his grip shifting to my shirt collar while his other hand gestured toward the basement windows. That little apartment downstairs? I can rent it to 3 different people. Shift workers who need a place to crash between jobs. $800 each per month. Cash payments. No questions asked. The mathematics of desperation became clear. Frank needed my $400 rent money tripled to have any hope of making payments to loan sharks who measured patience in weeks, not months. My presence represented an obstacle between him and survival. But here's where it gets complicated, he whispered, pulling me even closer. I've been telling Martha that supporting you is what's draining our savings account. Every time she asks why we can't afford to fix the washing machine or take that weekend trip to Wisconsin, I blame it on the cost of having a convicted felon under our roof. My stomach dropped as the full scope of his deception sank in. Frank had been stealing from their joint accounts to fund his gambling, then using my criminal record as a cover story to explain their financial struggles. Martha believed she was sacrificing for family loyalty when she was actually funding her husband's self-destruction. She doesn't know about the poker games, obviously. Thinks I'm spending evenings at VFW meetings and weekend afternoons helping Jimmy Kowalski with his restaurant renovation. Every dollar I've borrowed from our emergency fund, every retirement check I've redirected toward paying minimum amounts to these collectors. She thinks it's all because we're supporting your rehabilitation. The cruelty of his strategy was breathtaking. He had weaponized my shame about being a burden on the family, making me complicit in hiding his own crimes. Every time Martha expressed worry about money, I had felt guilty about my presence in their home. I had even started eating less and refusing her offers to do my laundry, trying to minimize my impact on their budget. The beauty of this setup, Frank continued, his voice taking on an almost admiring tone for his own manipulation, is that when you disappear, everyone will understand why. Failed rehabilitation, couldn't handle the pressure of normal life, went back to old habits, and ended up in prison, or worse. Martha will be sad, but not surprised. He released my throat completely, but his hand remained on my shoulder, a deceptively casual gesture that maintained physical control. To anyone watching from the picnic tables, we looked like uncle and nephew having an intimate family conversation by the grill. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell everyone that your parole officer found out about some violations. Maybe you tested positive for drugs, or maybe you missed some required meetings. Doesn't matter what the specific story is, just something that means you have to leave immediately. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a raspy whisper. And, if I refuse? Frank's laugh was genuinely amused, like I had asked whether gravity was optional. Then I'll make the phone call myself. See, the Torinos have been asking questions about my family situation. They want to know about every person who lives in this house. Everyone who might overhear conversations or see faces they shouldn't see. The threat hung in the air between us like smoke from the grill. These weren't random loan sharks. They were professional criminals who understood that witnesses represented liability and liabilities needed to be eliminated. I've been telling them you're just temporary, that you'll be gone soon, but they're getting impatient with my payment schedule, and they're starting to suggest more permanent solutions to my family's financial knowledge. My blood turned to ice water as the implication became clear. Frank wasn't just stealing from Martha and lying about our expenses. He was putting all of us in danger by involving loan sharks who viewed loose ends as problems requiring violent solutions. So you see, Courtney, this isn't really about you being a parasite. You're just collateral damage in a situation that got way out of hand. But the good news is, if you cooperate with my timeline, everyone stays safe, and I get the rental income I need to keep these guys happy. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this desperate, dangerous stranger with the uncle who had taught me to drive and attended my high school graduation. Addiction had transformed him into someone capable of betraying family and consorting with killers, but he still talked about it like a reasonable business decision. What about Martha? What happens when she finds out about the gambling? She won't, he said with confidence I found chilling, because there won't be anything to find out. I work off this debt, get clean, and we move forward. Simple as that. But nothing about Frank's situation was simple, and we both knew it. Gambling addiction didn't vanish because you paid off one debt. And the Torino family didn't forget useful connections they could exploit later. He was trading immediate survival for long-term bondage to people who would own him forever. As I opened my mouth to respond, I noticed something that made Frank's entire plan irrelevant. A familiar figure walking through the gate at the side of the house, carrying a manila folder and wearing the serious expression I knew meant business. My parole officer, Lisa Chen, had arrived at the worst possible moment. Lisa Chen's timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more terrifying. She walked through the side gate of our backyard with the measured stride of someone who had dealt with family crisis situations more times than she cared to count. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same professional bun she wore to our monthly meetings, but something about her expression suggested this wasn't a routine parole check. Frank's grip on my shoulder turned into a vice as he spotted her approaching. His entire body went rigid, and I felt him trying to position himself between Lisa and me. But there was nowhere to hide in the middle of a family barbecue, and 20 relatives had already noticed the newcomer making her way across the lawn. "Courtney Williams?" Lisa called out in her clear, authoritative voice that carried easily across the yard. "I need to speak with you for a moment." The family gathering ground to a halt, like someone had unplugged a jukebox. Conversations died mid-sentence, children stopped running, and even the dogs seemed to sense the tension hanging in the air. Everyone knew what a parole officer visit meant, especially an unscheduled one on a weekend evening. Frank's breathing became shallow and rapid beside me. The confident manipulator who had just finished threatening my life was suddenly sweating like he had run a marathon. His reaction seemed disproportionate to the situation. Most people got nervous around law enforcement, but Frank looked genuinely terrified. "Actually," Lisa said, her eyes moving from me to Frank and back again, "I think I need to speak with both of you." That's when Frank made his fatal mistake. Instead of playing it cool and letting the conversation unfold naturally, he attempted to maintain his physical dominance over the situation. His hand moved back to my throat, not quite choking me, but making his control unmistakably clear to everyone watching. "This is a private family gathering," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard with forced authority. "Whatever business you have with my nephew can wait until normal business hours." Lisa stopped walking and tilted her head slightly, studying Frank with the kind of focused attention that predators reserve for potential prey. I had seen that expression during our meetings when she suspected I wasn't telling her the complete truth about something. It meant she was shifting from routine supervision mode into active investigation mode. "Sir, I don't believe we've been introduced," she said politely, reaching into her jacket for her identification. "I'm Officer Lisa Chen with the Department of Corrections." "And you are?" "Frank Morrison. This is my house, and that's my nephew." His grip tightened on my throat for emphasis, a gesture that didn't escape Lisa's professional scrutiny. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need you to remove your hands from Courtney's neck." Her voice remained calm and conversational, but something in her tone made every adult in the backyard suddenly pay attention. This wasn't a request. It was an instruction being delivered by someone accustomed to having her instructions followed immediately. Frank's hand stayed exactly where it was. "Like I said, this is private family business. Courtney's been having some behavioral problems lately, and sometimes a firm hand is necessary to help him understand his place in this household." The family members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other with growing unease. Frank's public admission that he was physically controlling me had crossed a line that even his most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. Aunt Martha took a step toward us, her face showing confusion and concern. Lisa moved closer, her hand resting casually on her hip near her radio and badge. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you one more time to remove your hands from Mr. Williams. After that, I'll be making some phone calls that I don't think you want me to make." The threat was vague enough to sound routine but specific enough to make Frank's face drain of color. Whatever Lisa knew or suspected about his situation, it was enough to terrify him beyond rational thought. His hand trembled against my throat as he warred between maintaining dominance and avoiding whatever consequences Lisa was promising. That's when she moved within arm's reach and placed her hand gently but firmly on Frank's shoulder. The gesture looked almost friendly, like she was trying to reason with an upset family member, but I felt Frank's entire body go rigid at her touch, as if her fingers carried an electric charge. "Let him go," she said quietly, her voice carrying only far enough for Frank to hear clearly, or face federal conspiracy charges. 8 words that changed everything. Frank's hand dropped from my throat like he had touched a hot stove. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him pale and shaking. Whatever Lisa knew about his situation, it went far beyond a simple gambling debt or family dispute. Federal conspiracy charges meant connections to organized crime, money laundering, or other serious felonies that carried decade-long prison sentences. The family watched this exchange with growing alarm. They had come expecting potato salad and gossip, not a confrontation between law enforcement and their host. Children were herded toward the house by nervous parents, while the adults tried to process what they were witnessing. Lisa kept her hand on Frank's shoulder as she addressed me directly. "Courtney, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" I rubbed my throat, feeling the tender spots where Frank's fingers had pressed against my windpipe. "I'm okay. Just confused about what's happening here." "That makes 2 of us," Aunt Martha said, approaching our group with the determined expression of someone demanding answers. "Frank, what is this woman talking about? What federal charges?" Frank opened and closed his mouth several times, without producing any sound. His eyes darted between Lisa and the family members gathering around us, calculating whether he could somehow talk his way out of whatever trap he had walked into. "Mrs. Morrison," Lisa addressed my aunt directly, "I think you and your family should sit down for this conversation. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." She guided us toward the picnic table closest to the house, positioning herself where she could see both the yard and the street. This wasn't random placement. She was maintaining tactical awareness while creating a semi-private space for serious conversation. "Courtney," she said, settling into the bench across from me, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Has Frank ever mentioned owing money to anyone? Has he talked about gambling or meeting with people you didn't recognize?" I glanced at Frank, who was staring at Lisa with the expression of someone watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. The man who had just finished threatening my life now looked like he needed protection from whatever storm was about to break over his head. "He just told me he owes $35,000 to loan sharks connected to the Torino family out of Chicago," I said, watching Frank's face crumple at my words. Lisa nodded like this confirmed information she already possessed. "What else did he tell you? That he's been stealing money from his wife's accounts to pay gambling debts, that he's been blaming their financial problems on the cost of supporting me, and that he wants me to leave so he can rent my room to multiple tenants for cash income." Aunt Martha made a small, wounded sound and sank onto the bench beside me. Her world was disintegrating as quickly as Frank's, but for completely different reasons. Everything she had believed about their marriage and their finances was being revealed as an elaborate lie. "Frank," Lisa said, turning her attention back to my uncle, "I think it's time you and I had a private conversation about your relationship with the Kowalski establishment and certain Chicago area business associates." The way she said it made clear this wasn't the first time Lisa had connected those dots. She knew about the poker games, the loan sharks, and the dangerous people Frank had gotten involved with. But her knowledge seemed deeper and more detailed than a routine parole officer would possess through casual investigation. I was beginning to suspect that Lisa's surprise visit to our family barbecue wasn't a coincidence at all. She had come here looking for Frank, not me. And whatever information she possessed about his criminal connections ran much deeper than a simple gambling addiction and debt collection problem. As Frank's terrified silence stretched on, I realized that the real story was just beginning to unfold. My uncle's betrayal and threats were only the surface of something much more complex and dangerous than I had imagined. Lisa's next words shattered what remained of my understanding about my family, my past, and my father's death 3 years ago. "Courtney, before we go any further, I need to tell you something about your father that your family never knew. David Williams wasn't just a construction worker. For the last 2 years of his life, he was a federal informant helping us build a case against the same criminal organization that Frank has gotten involved with." The backyard seemed to tilt on its axis. My father, who had taught me to throw a curveball and change a tire, who had worked construction for 23 years without missing a single day, had been secretly fighting organized crime. The revelation felt impossible, and inevitable, at the same time. That's ridiculous, Frank stammered, finding his voice for the first time since Lisa had touched his shoulder. David never mentioned anything about federal agents or criminal investigations. He was just my brother who minded his own business and showed up for family dinners. Lisa pulled a folder from her jacket and spread several photographs across the picnic table. They showed my father sitting in various locations with a woman I recognized as Lisa, though she looked younger and wore different clothes. Coffee shops, park benches, the parking lot of a Home Depot, mundane locations where two people could meet without attracting attention. Your father contacted us 18 months before his death, Lisa continued, her voice gentle but professional. He had been working construction projects for several businesses that were fronts for money laundering operations. When he realized what was happening, he came to us voluntarily. Aunt Martha leaned forward to study the photographs, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and grief. This is real? David was working with the FBI? Not the FBI directly. I'm with a joint task force that coordinates between multiple agencies when organized crime cases cross state lines. Your husband has been working construction for some of the same businesses your brother-in-law was investigating before his death. Frank's face went completely white. David's car accident wasn't an accident, Lisa finished quietly. We believe his cover was blown, and the organization decided to eliminate him before he could testify. The brake lines on his truck were severed, but we couldn't prove it conclusively enough for prosecution. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach and stolen all the air from my lungs. My father hadn't died because of mechanical failure or bad luck. He had been murdered for trying to do the right thing, and his family had never known about his sacrifice. Why are you telling us this now? I managed to ask through the tightness in my throat. Because the same people who killed your father have been systematically targeting his family ever since. Your arrest for armed robbery wasn't random, Courtney. You were being watched and manipulated by people who suspected your father's role in our investigation. The convenience store robbery that had destroyed my life suddenly looked different through this new lens. The job loss that had pushed me toward desperation. The landlord, who had suddenly demanded 3 months' rent in advance. The series of small financial emergencies that had left me broke and desperate enough to consider armed robbery. They wanted to discredit your father's family, Lisa explained, arranging more documents on the table. Turn his son into a criminal, destroy his reputation posthumously, and ensure that no one would believe anything the Williams family might say about ongoing criminal activities. Frank was shaking his head repeatedly, like he could reject this reality through sheer force of will. This is insane. You're saying that everything that happened to Courtney, everything that's happening to me now, is connected to some conspiracy theory about my dead brother? I'm saying that Vincent Torino's organization has been very thorough about eliminating threats to their operation. Your father represented the biggest threat they had faced in years, and they've spent the last 3 years making sure his sacrifice couldn't damage them posthumously. Lisa pulled out a recording device and placed it on the table between us. Frank, would you like to hear some of the conversations we've recorded between you and Vincent's collectors? The ones where you provide detailed information about Courtney's work schedule, his movements around town, and his emotional state? Frank looked like he might vomit. I wasn't. They just asked casual questions about family. I thought they were making conversation while we discussed payment arrangements. You told them which days Courtney worked late at the auto shop. You mentioned when he went to AA meetings, and what route he took walking home afterward. You provided information about his emotional vulnerabilities and his attempts to rebuild relationships with family members. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. My uncle hadn't just betrayed me for money. He had been feeding information to the same criminals who had orchestrated my father's death and my subsequent downfall. The family gathering, the threats, the strangling. All of it was connected to a larger conspiracy I was only beginning to understand. But here's what Vincent's people didn't tell you, Frank, Lisa continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. They've been planning to eliminate Courtney permanently. Your information wasn't helping them collect debts. It was helping them plan a murder that would look like a drug deal gone wrong, or a parole violation that ended in violence. Martha grabbed my hand across the table, her fingers cold and trembling. They want to kill him? Because of something my brother-in-law did years ago? Because loose ends represent ongoing liability in their business model. David Williams proved that seemingly ordinary citizens could pose extraordinary threats to their operation. They can't afford to let his son grow up and potentially discover his father's real legacy. I thought about the job interview failures, the social rejections, the constant feeling that I was being watched and judged more harshly than other ex-convicts trying to rebuild their lives. How much of my struggle had been natural consequences of my criminal record, and how much had been deliberate sabotage by people who wanted me to fail. So, what happens now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Lisa gathered the photographs and documents back into her folder. That depends on what you're willing to do to finish what your father started. We have enough evidence to move against the organization, but we need someone on the inside to help us coordinate the final phase of the operation. Frank's head snapped up. Inside? You want him to go undercover? These people will kill him the moment they suspect anything. They're planning to kill him anyway, Lisa replied matter-of-factly. At least this way, he has a chance to honor his father's sacrifice and help us put Vincent Torino behind bars for the rest of his life. The choice she was offering felt both impossible and inevitable. I could run, try to disappear into witness protection, and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or I could stand and fight the people who had destroyed my family and stolen my father's legacy. But there was something Lisa hadn't explained yet. Something about the timing of her arrival and the depth of her knowledge about Frank's situation. I had a feeling that my uncle's gambling debts and criminal associations were more complicated than even this federal investigation could explain. Lisa, I said slowly, how long have you been watching Frank? How did you know to show up here tonight? Her smile was thin and professional, the expression of someone who had been waiting for that exact question. Because Frank's gambling problem and his connection to Vincent's organization wasn't an accident, Courtney. Just like your arrest wasn't an accident. They've been positioning him as a potential asset for over a year. And we've been watching every step of the process. Frank's face crumpled as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. He hadn't just stumbled into a gambling addiction and debt crisis. He had been deliberately recruited and compromised by the same criminals who had killed his brother and destroyed his nephew's life. We were all victims of a plan that had been years in the making, and now Lisa was offering us a chance to turn the tables on the people who had treated our family like disposable pawns in their criminal enterprise. The question was whether we were brave enough to take it. Lisa's revelation about Frank's recruitment sent him into a near-panic state. He stood abruptly from the picnic table, knocking over his beer bottle and beginning to pace in tight circles like a caged animal. The rest of our family watched from other tables, clearly sensing that something monumental was happening but unable to hear the details of our conversation. You have to understand, Frank said, his voice breaking as he struggled to process the scope of his manipulation. When I started having money problems after the factory layoffs, Jimmy Kowalski seemed like a godsend. He offered me cash work renovating his restaurant, no questions asked about tax documentation, and when he mentioned the poker games in the back room, it felt like a natural way to supplement my income. Lisa pulled out another folder, this one containing what looked like surveillance photographs and financial documents. James Kowalski has been running recruitment operations for Vincent Torino's organization for 8 years. They identify financially vulnerable individuals with useful family connections and gradually draw them into compromising situations. She spread several photos across the table, showing Frank at various locations with men I didn't recognize. Construction sites, bars, the back room of Kowalski's restaurant. In every image, Frank looked relaxed and happy, like he was among friends who understood his problems. They studied your family extensively before approaching Frank, Lisa continued. They knew about David's construction background, his family connections, and his potential access to information about money laundering operations. When David became an informant, they shifted their focus to neutralizing his family through recruitment and manipulation rather than direct confrontation. Frank stopped pacing and stared at the photographs. You're saying they targeted me specifically because I'm David's brother? That the poker games, the loans, all of it was planned from the beginning? Look at these financial records, Lisa said, pointing to a series of documents showing Frank's gambling wins and losses over 18 months. Notice the pattern? You won consistently for the first 6 months, building confidence and increasing your stakes. Then you started losing, but never quite enough to force you out of the games completely. The pattern was obvious once she pointed it out. Frank's early success had been carefully orchestrated to hook him into believing he could gamble his way out of financial problems. Then his luck had turned in precisely calculated increments, keeping him desperate but not completely hopeless. They needed you to accumulate enough debt to make you dependent on their goodwill, Lisa explained. But they also needed you to maintain access to family information and living situations that could be useful for ongoing operations. Your basement apartment arrangement with Courtney was perfect for their purposes. Martha had been silent throughout this explanation, but now she found her voice. How long have you known about this? How long have you been watching my husband get manipulated by criminals, while I believed his lies about supporting Courtney? Lisa's expression softened slightly. We identified Frank as a potential recruitment target about 14 months ago. We've been documenting his interactions with Kowalski's organization ever since, hoping to use his connection to build a stronger case against Vincent's operation. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You've been using Frank as bait. You let him get deeper into debt and danger because it served your investigation. We tried to intervene subtly, Lisa said defensively. Anonymous tips to local police about the poker games. Information passed to financial institutions about suspicious money transfers. But Frank was too committed to the fantasy that he could gamble his way out of trouble. Frank sank back onto the picnic bench, his head in his hands. So everything is a lie. The friendship with Jimmy. The sense that I finally found people who understood what it's like to struggle financially. All of it was just manipulation. Not entirely, Lisa corrected. The friendship was real, but it was based on Jimmy's professional need to gain your trust. He genuinely likes you, Frank, but his primary motivation was always advancing the organization's interests. She pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the table. This conversation took place 3 days ago between Jimmy Kowalski and Vincent Torino. I think you should hear it. The audio quality was clear enough to distinguish both voices, though they spoke in the coded language that criminals use when they suspect surveillance. Jimmy's voice was casual and friendly, the same tone Frank had probably heard dozens of times during their poker games. The construction guy is getting antsy about his situation, Jimmy said. Keeps asking about extended payment plans and whether we might consider reducing the principal balance. Vincent's response was colder, more businesslike. His usefulness is declining. The nephew is becoming a liability rather than an asset. And the wife is asking too many questions about their financial situation. What do you want me to tell him? Tell him we're working on a permanent solution to his problems. But make sure he understands that cooperation with law enforcement would create much bigger problems for his entire family. Frank's face went gray as he listened to people he had considered friends discussing his life like a business transaction. The casual reference to a permanent solution clearly meant something more sinister than debt forgiveness or extended payment plans. They're planning to kill me, Frank whispered, the reality finally penetrating his denial. And probably Martha too, since she might know too much about our finances. Actually, Lisa said, stopping the recording, their plan is more sophisticated than that. They want to stage your deaths to look like a murder-suicide situation. Frank discovers that Courtney has relapsed into criminal behavior, confronts him violently, and the situation escalates until everyone is dead. The scenario she described felt horrifyingly plausible. Frank's public display of anger and physical aggression tonight had provided perfect foundation for such a story. My criminal record would make police assume I had returned to violence when confronted about parole violations or family tensions. When? Martha asked quietly. When were they planning to do this? Lisa checked her watch, with the precision of someone working on a strict timeline. Based on our surveillance, the timeline has been accelerated. Jimmy received instructions yesterday to resolve the Frank Morrison situation by the end of this week. Your nephew's presence at this family gathering was supposed to provide the perfect opportunity. I felt ice water flowing through my veins. They're here? Tonight? 2 vehicles have been circling this neighborhood for the past hour. Professional surveillance teams documenting who attends this gathering and when people leave. They're waiting for the right moment to make their move. Frank jumped up from the table again, this time looking toward the street with genuine terror. We have to call the police. We have to get everyone out of here. The local police can't help with this situation, Lisa said firmly. Vincent's organization has been preparing for law enforcement intervention for months. They have backup plans, alternative locations, and enough political connections to complicate any standard police response. Then what do we do? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Lisa smiled for the first time since arriving at our barbecue. We turn the tables on people who have been manipulating your family for 3 years, but it's going to require you to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly. She pulled out her phone and showed us a text message thread with someone identified only as coordinator. The messages were brief and professional, but they indicated a level of preparation and support that went far beyond a single parole officer investigating gambling debts. This operation has been planned for months, Courtney. We've been waiting for Vincent's people to commit to a specific timeline and location. Tonight's events have forced them to accelerate their plan, which actually works to our advantage. Frank was shaking his head repeatedly. This is insane. You want us to participate in some kind of federal sting operation against professional criminals who murder people for a living? I want you to help us finish what your brother started, Lisa replied, looking directly at me. David Williams died trying to protect other families from the same manipulation and violence that Vincent's organization has used against you. His sacrifice deserves better than watching his son and brother become victims of the same criminals he died fighting. The choice she was offering felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. I could run, try to escape the trap that had been closing around my family for years, or I could stand and fight for the justice my father had died pursuing. But before I could respond, Martha asked the question that would determine everything that happened next. If we help you, can you guarantee our safety? Can you promise that this nightmare will actually end? Lisa's answer would either save our family or destroy us completely. Lisa's response was not what any of us expected. I can't guarantee your safety, Mrs. Morrison, but I can guarantee that if you don't help us tonight, none of you will live to see next weekend. She stood up from the picnic table and gestured for us to follow her toward the house, away from the remaining family members who were still trying to pretend this was a normal barbecue. Her movements were purposeful and urgent, like someone operating on a carefully planned timeline. Here's what Vincent's people don't know, Lisa continued as we walked. This entire neighborhood has been under federal surveillance for 6 weeks. Every vehicle that enters or leaves this street is being photographed and tracked. Every phone call made within a 3-block radius is being monitored. And every member of Vincent's organization who shows up tonight is walking into a trap they helped us design. Frank stopped walking. You used us as bait. You knew they were planning something tonight, and you let us host a family gathering to draw them into the open. We gave you an opportunity to be heroes instead of victims, Lisa corrected. Your choice to host this barbecue provided the perfect setting for a controlled confrontation. Now Vincent's people are committed to a specific location and timeline, which eliminates their strategic advantages. She pulled out her phone and showed us a satellite view of our neighborhood marked with various colored dots. Red dots indicated hostile surveillance teams. Blue dots showed federal agents in position. Green dots marked escape routes and safe zones. As of 15 minutes ago, we have positive identification on 12 members of Vincent's organization in the immediate area. 3 surveillance teams, 2 intervention units, and a cleanup crew standing by to eliminate evidence after the operation concludes. The scope of the federal presence was overwhelming. This wasn't a simple arrest operation. It was a carefully orchestrated takedown of an entire criminal network using our family gathering as the focal point. What do you need us to do? I asked, realizing that cooperation was our only viable option. Lisa handed me a small electronic device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a communication earpiece that will keep you connected to our tactical coordinator. Frank will wear a recording device that will document any attempts at intimidation or violence, and Martha will help us establish the family context that explains why everyone is gathered here tonight. You want us to act natural while professional criminals are planning to murder us? Martha asked incredulously. I want you to help us create the conditions that allow us to arrest them for conspiracy, attempted murder, and ongoing criminal enterprise activities. The charges we can prove tonight will put Vincent Torino behind bars for the rest of his life. Frank was pacing again, but this time his movements seemed more focused than panicked. What about the other family members? My cousins, my mother-in-law, the children. They don't deserve to be put in danger because of my mistakes. They're already in danger, Lisa pointed out. Vincent's organization doesn't leave witnesses to failed operations. If we don't stop them tonight, everyone who attended this gathering becomes a potential liability that needs to be eliminated. The reality of our situation was becoming clearer. We weren't choosing between safety and danger. We were choosing between passive victimhood and active resistance. The criminals had already decided our fate. Lisa was offering us a chance to influence the outcome. How do we know this will work? I asked. How do we know Vincent's people won't realize they're walking into a trap? Lisa smiled with genuine confidence for the first time all evening. Because they've been so focused on manipulating you that they haven't noticed us manipulating them. Every piece of information Frank provided about family gatherings, every detail about Courtney's schedule, every conversation Jimmy Kowalski thought he was controlling, we've been feeding them carefully crafted intelligence designed to bring them here tonight. She showed us several more surveillance photographs, these showing Jimmy Kowalski and other men I didn't recognize positioning themselves around our neighborhood over the past 2 hours. Their body language suggested confidence and control, like hunters moving into position to capture easy prey. They think they're about to solve their Frank Morrison problem permanently, while eliminating a potential witness to their ongoing operations. What they don't realize is that they're about to provide us with video documentation of conspiracy to commit murder against a federal witness family. Frank stopped pacing and looked directly at Lisa. Federal witness family? Is that what we are now? That's what you became the moment David Williams decided to risk his life fighting organized crime. Your family has been part of this investigation for 3 years, whether you knew it or not. Tonight is your chance to make his sacrifice meaningful. I thought about my father working construction during the day and meeting with federal agents in secret, knowing that discovery would mean death but continuing anyway because he believed some fights were worth the risk. The courage that decision required seemed impossible to comprehend. What about afterward? Martha asked. If we help you arrest these people tonight, what happens to our lives? Do we have to move? Change our names? Live in hiding? Vincent Torino's organization will be destroyed by the evidence we collect tonight. The key players will be facing federal charges that carry life sentences without possibility of parole. Their ability to retaliate against witnesses will be eliminated along with their freedom. Lisa's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, then looked up at us with an expression of grim satisfaction. Vincent himself is en route to supervise tonight's operation personally. He wants to ensure that the Frank Morrison situation is resolved completely and permanently. His presence here will allow us to charge him directly with conspiracy to commit murder. The significance of that development was enormous. Vincent Torino had survived decades of law enforcement attention by maintaining distance from actual criminal activities. His decision to personally oversee our murders would provide the direct evidence needed to prosecute him successfully. So what happens next? I asked. Next, we go back to the barbecue and act like a normal family having normal conversations. Frank apologizes for his outburst and explains that he's been under stress about work. You accept his apology and continue flipping burgers. Martha offers everyone dessert and coffee. The plan sounded almost anticlimactic after everything we had learned. That's it? We just wait for them to attack us? We create the conditions that encourage them to reveal their intentions clearly and unambiguously. Once they commit to specific criminal acts in front of multiple witnesses, our intervention teams will move in and arrest everyone involved. Frank was nodding slowly, like someone finally understanding a complex puzzle. How long do we have to maintain this act? Lisa checked her watch. Based on their positioning and communications, I estimate 20 to 30 minutes before they make their move. Just long enough for the extended family to finish eating and start cleaning up, which will provide natural opportunities for some people to go inside the house and others to work around the yard. "And you're sure this will work?" Martha asked one final time. "I'm sure that your husband and nephew are going to help us complete the most important organized crime investigation of the past decade. I'm sure that David Williams would be proud of what his family is about to accomplish. And I'm sure that Vincent Torino's reign of terror ends tonight." As we walked back toward the picnic tables, I realized that the next 30 minutes would either vindicate my father's sacrifice or result in the destruction of everyone he had died trying to protect. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was fighting for something meaningful, rather than just surviving from one day to the next. Whatever happened tonight, Frank and I would finally have the chance to honor the courage my father had shown in standing up to evil people who profited from other families' suffering. The only question was whether we were brave enough to follow through with a plan that would either make us heroes or get us all killed. 23 minutes later, Vincent Torino made the mistake that ended his criminal empire. I was refilling drinks at the beverage station when 3 men approached our backyard through the gate Frank had left open for late-arriving family members. They moved with the casual confidence of people who believed they controlled every variable in their environment. Vincent himself was easily recognizable from the surveillance photos Lisa had shown us. A compact man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit that seemed inappropriate for a neighborhood barbecue. Frank was cleaning the grill when Vincent approached him, their conversation initially appearing friendly to anyone watching from the picnic tables. But through my earpiece, I could hear every word being recorded by the device Lisa had given Frank. "Jimmy tells me you've been having second thoughts about our arrangement," Vincent said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made grown men confess their sins. "Not second thoughts," Frank replied, his voice steadier than I had expected. "Just hoping we might work out a longer payment schedule. Maybe reduce the interest charges considering my family situation." Vincent's laugh was genuinely amused. "Frank, you misunderstand the nature of our relationship. This was never a loan between friends. This was an investment in your family's future cooperation with certain business ventures." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your nephew's criminal record makes him useful for activities that require someone with existing law enforcement connections. Your wife's position at the county clerk's office provides access to property records and financial documents. And your basement apartment offers convenient meeting space for associates who need temporary accommodations." The scope of their long-term plans for our family was breathtaking. They hadn't just wanted Frank's money. They had wanted to transform our entire household into a resource for ongoing criminal operations. "And if I refuse?" Vincent's response was delivered with the casual tone someone might use to discuss weekend weather plans. "Then we eliminate the complications and find a more cooperative family to work with." Simple business decision, really. Through my earpiece, I heard Lisa's voice confirming that she had clear audio of Vincent's threats, and that arrest teams were moving into position. I glanced around the backyard and noticed several men I didn't recognize positioned near the house and fence line, their body language suggesting they were ready to prevent anyone from leaving if the situation escalated. But Vincent wasn't finished making incriminating statements. As Frank continued asking questions about payment alternatives, Vincent became increasingly specific about his organization's methods and expectations. "You see, Frank, families like yours are valuable precisely because you have legitimate jobs, clean criminal records, and social connections that provide cover for our activities. Your brother David understood this principle, which is why he had to be eliminated before he could damage our recruitment pipeline." My blood ran cold. Vincent had just confessed to ordering my father's murder in front of multiple recording devices and federal witnesses. "David was working with federal agents," Frank said, following the script Lisa had provided to encourage further confessions. "David was a naive man who believed he could interfere with business operations that had been successful for decades. His death sent an important message to other potential informants about the consequences of disloyalty." Vincent gestured toward me at the beverage station. Now, his son has the opportunity to demonstrate whether he inherited his father's stupidity or learned from his father's mistakes. Courtney's parole situation makes him ideal for certain transportation and distribution activities that require someone with existing criminal justice system connections. I understood now that my arrest, conviction, and parole had all been part of a larger plan to create a compromised family member who could be exploited for ongoing criminal activities. Every aspect of my legal troubles had been designed to make me useful to Vincent's organization while destroying my ability to resist their recruitment. Through my earpiece, Lisa confirmed that they had recorded enough evidence to prosecute Vincent and his associates for conspiracy, murder, organized criminal activity, and multiple federal racketeering charges. The arrest teams were ready to move on her signal, but Vincent made one final mistake that sealed his fate permanently. As Martha approached our group carrying a tray of coffee cups, Vincent turned his attention to her with the same casual menace he had used on Frank. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband has created some complications that require resolution. I hope you'll be more reasonable than he's been about finding mutually beneficial solutions." "What kind of solutions?" Martha asked, playing her role perfectly. "The kind that ensure your family's continued health and prosperity. Your position at the county clerk's office provides access to information about property transfers, estate settlements, and financial records that could be very useful for our business operations." Martha set down the coffee tray with steady hands. "And if I refuse to provide that information?" Vincent's smile was genuinely warm, which made his words even more chilling. "Then we'll arrange for you to join your brother-in-law David in his unfortunate accident, and your nephew will discover that parolee deaths during violent family disputes are sadly common and rarely investigated thoroughly." That was the moment Lisa's voice crackled through my earpiece. "All teams, execute arrest protocol now." The next 60 seconds transformed our quiet neighborhood into a scene from an action movie. Federal agents emerged from vehicles, houses, and concealment positions throughout the area. Vincent's associates found themselves surrounded by armed agents who had been monitoring their every move for hours. Vincent himself seemed more irritated than surprised by the sudden law enforcement presence, like someone whose dinner reservation had been delayed rather than someone facing life imprisonment. "Vincent Torino," Lisa announced, approaching him with her badge displayed prominently. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, ongoing criminal enterprise activities, and federal racketeering violations." As the handcuffs clicked around Vincent's wrists, he looked directly at me with an expression of genuine respect. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "He raised a son who understands the value of choosing the right side in a fight." The arrests continued throughout the evening as federal agents documented evidence and interviewed witnesses. Our family gathering had been transformed into a crime scene, but somehow the atmosphere felt more like a celebration than a tragedy. Frank spent 2 hours providing detailed statements about his recruitment and manipulation by Vincent's organization. His cooperation with the federal investigation earned him immunity from prosecution and enrollment in a debt relief program for victims of organized crime. Martha learned that her job at the county clerk's office had been specifically targeted by criminals who wanted access to confidential records. The revelation helped explain several suspicious requests she had received over the past year from people claiming to represent legitimate businesses. But the most important discovery came when Lisa presented me with a box of my father's personal effects that had been held as evidence in the federal investigation. Among his construction tools and work clothes, I found a series of letters he had written but never sent, addressed to me, and intended to be delivered if something happened to him. The final letter, dated 3 days before his death, contained words that changed my understanding of everything that had happened to our family. "Courtney, if you're reading this, then the dangerous people I've been fighting have succeeded in silencing me. But my death doesn't mean their victory. It means the beginning of your opportunity to finish what I started. You have the strength and courage to fight for justice, even when the cost seems too high to bear. Every choice you make from this moment forward is a chance to honor the memory of everyone who has suffered because of criminal organizations that profit from other people's pain. Make me proud by choosing to be better than our circumstances and stronger than our enemies. Your father, David Williams." 6 months later, I testified in federal court against Vincent Torino and 12 members of his criminal organization. Their convictions resulted in prison sentences totaling over 300 years, effectively destroying a network that had operated successfully for decades. Frank completed addiction treatment and found legitimate employment as a project supervisor for a construction company that specialized in renovating homes for low-income families. His experience with financial manipulation made him an effective advocate for other families targeted by predatory lending and gambling recruitment schemes. Martha used her knowledge of Vincent's organization to help law enforcement identify other county employees who had been approached for assistance with criminal activities. Her cooperation led to additional arrests and helped prevent other families from experiencing the manipulation we had endured. I finished my parole successfully and enrolled in the community college criminal justice program, with plans to become a victim's advocate specializing in families affected by organized crime. The federal investigation had taught me that fighting injustice required more than good intentions. It required knowledge, preparation, and the courage to stand up when standing up seemed impossible. 1 year after Vincent's arrest, our family held another backyard barbecue. This time, the guests included Lisa Chen, Frank's addiction counselor, several federal agents who had worked on the case, and the families of other victims who had found justice through our investigation. As I stood by the same grill where Frank had once threatened my life, I thought about the difference between revenge and justice, between surviving trauma and transforming it into something meaningful. My father had died believing that ordinary people could fight extraordinary evil if they were willing to accept the risks and responsibilities that came with standing up for what was right. Vincent Torino had spent decades destroying families through manipulation, violence, and fear. But in the end, one family's decision to fight back had ended his reign of terror permanently. The criminals who had treated us like disposable pawns discovered that even pawns could checkmate kings when they were willing to sacrifice for a larger purpose. The most important lesson I learned through this experience was that redemption doesn't come from forgetting past mistakes. It comes from using those mistakes as motivation to create a better future for other people facing similar challenges. Every family destroyed by organized crime deserved advocates who understood the cost of criminal manipulation from personal experience. As our celebration continued into the evening, I realized that my father's sacrifice had accomplished more than he could have imagined. His death hadn't just helped law enforcement arrest criminals. It had inspired his family to become the kind of people who fought for justice, rather than simply hoping justice would find them. I want to ask you something that connects to this story, and maybe to your own life experiences. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was manipulating you for their own benefit? And how did you find the courage to stand up for yourself when the cost of fighting back seemed too high to bear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences of finding strength in difficult family situations. I want to thank everyone who took the time to listen to this story about family loyalty, betrayal, and the difference between revenge and justice. Your support means everything to creators like me, who believe that sharing real stories about overcoming adversity can help other people find hope and courage in their own challenging situations. If this story helped you think differently about family relationships, second chances, or standing up to people who try to manipulate and control you, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear that even the darkest family situations can lead to positive transformation when people choose courage over fear. Until next time, remember that your past mistakes don't define your future possibilities. And sometimes the greatest strength comes from choosing to fight for others instead of just surviving for yourself.